Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind bars?
This is an urgent news flash bringing you the latest seismic shift in the Sean Diddy Combs legal saga. You are looking live at the Manhattan Federal Courthouse. The scene of today's utterly stunning.
We're getting in the Sean Combs post-verdict world is what's next, right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second, he was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges, he was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago.
Unprecedented legal development. The music mogul, once the king of hip-hop, now a convicted felon, walked into court expecting the predictable. But what unfolded has sent shockwaves through the entire legal and entertainment world. Sources inside the courtroom describe an atmosphere thick with tension, palpable dread hanging over the proceedings. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for the bombshell dropped by the presiding judge today. For those keeping track, Diddy, whose real name is Sean Combs, was already serving a substantial sentence for serious convictions related to transportation for prostitution, a sentence which had already stripped him of his freedom and his empire. His legal team was fighting tooth and nail, appealing every aspect, every single month of his 50-month incarceration, holding on to the faint hope of an early release, perhaps for time served, perhaps due to good behavior programs, or even an outside shot at a presidential pardon which was quickly denied. His projected release date, May 2028, was already a stark reality, but today, that reality was shredded. Inside the packed courtroom,
$50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an
Yes.
interesting argument because that who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, and we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to...
The air crackled. Combs, reportedly subdued and visibly thinner than his flamboyant past self, was present, flanked by his defense team. The proceeding began innocuously enough, a seemingly routine hearing to address procedural matters related to his appeal and his confinement conditions. Then, the judge spoke. The tone was grave, the language formal, but the meaning was brutally clear. The judge, citing what he called a series of newly presented, compelling pieces of evidence and a detailed reevaluation of the defendant's conduct both before and during his incarceration, delivered a ruling that stunned everyone into absolute silence. He announced a sudden, dramatic, and significant extension of Sean Combs' existing prison sentence. This wasn't a matter of denying an early release. This was an addition of years to the already substantial time he was set to serve. The exact length of the extension has not been officially and clearly specified in the first reports, but the courtroom observers are using words like multiple years and a decade more. This unexpected decision, made seemingly on the
To violate the conditions.
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried. I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package, that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think you got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really gonna watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. Things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered, he wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress, when that happened, we were talking and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because
court's own motion after a sealed review of documentation immediately obliterates the May 2028 release date. We are now talking about Combs serving a minimum of over 8 or possibly a staggering 15 years, maybe even longer, behind bars. The man who defined luxury and freedom is now facing an eternity in a federal correctional facility. But the most devastating blow, the part that caused gasps in the gallery and a visible tremor in Diddy's demeanor, was the chilling addendum to the judge's ruling. The extension, the judge declared with an unnerving finality, comes with no chance of parole or early release. Let that sink in. For a federal conviction, this kind of no parole mandate is extraordinarily rare and is typically reserved for the most heinous, unrepentant crimes. It strips away every shred of hope for the future that Combs' defense team was clinging to. No good behavior credit, no drug program reduction, no appeal that would reduce the time. The calendar is the only master now. The years will pass, one by one, with no door opening until the full term.
If all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably...
Term is served. The cameras outside the courthouse captured the raw emotion of the moment. We saw Combs' lawyers emerge, their faces ashen, visibly reeling from the shock. They issued a brief, frantic statement promising an immediate and aggressive appeal, but even their tone lacked conviction. They know the severity of what they've just heard. To have a sentence suddenly extended in a judicial setting, based on information not initially presented at the time of sentencing, is an extraordinary legal maneuver. One that speaks volumes about the gravity of the newly assessed information or the court's perception of the defendant's complete lack of remorse and continued danger to the community. What exactly was this new evidence that triggered such a monumental change in the sentence? That detail is still shrouded in secrecy, likely kept under seal to protect ongoing investigations or the privacy of additional alleged victims or witnesses who may have just recently come forward. Speculation is running wild, but the consensus among legal analysts is that it must be something of extreme weight.
Allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women, and that
Okay.
being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were little points that were brought up in terms of like the civil matters, those including like Bonna and her civil claim, Dawn Richard and her civil claim. I think even during the cross-examination of Cassie, one of the defense attorneys, that would be Anna Esteval, she had asked, you know, was the baby oil laced? And I was thinking back to the civil claims, because a lot of civil claims had, a lot of civil suits had claimed that
And it wasn't laced.
that it was, the civil suits claimed it was laced, but then in the criminal trial, Cassie had confirmed that the baby oil was never laced
Right.
with any type of narcotics or anything like that.
By the way, Combs' legal team said in a statement to Page 6, quote, Mr. Combs' trial and acquittal on trafficking and RICO charges proves what we have been saying all along. Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone. That people continue to broadcast and file false accusations, no matter how heinous and uncorroborated, is unfortunate. But Mr. Combs will not back down. He will fight for as long as necessary to win his full vindication. I talked about it on a previous sidebar, how he might tackle all these lawsuits, maybe motions to dismiss, maybe try to say, you know, these Jane and John Doe shouldn't proceed under pseudonyms. If you can convince a court of that, they may be reluctant to continue the case if they have to expose their identities. He might try to get rid of them at initial stages as much as possible.
And he was successful at that at
Yeah.
the beginning too.
Yeah, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the jurors, okay? So first, a juror has spoken out since the verdict. Not surprising, we had a feeling this would happen. This unnamed juror apparently spoke to ABC and said that the public reaction to this decision, quote, is highly insulting and belittling to the jury and the deliberation process. We spent over 2 days deliberating. Our decision was based solely on the evidence presented and how the law is stated. We would have treated any defendant in the same manner regardless of who they are. I have nothing else to say. Now, you watched the jury, okay? And we'll talk about what an alternate juror had to say too, but you watched the jury. You watched them day in and day out. What do you make of that statement?
I was a little surprised by
Really?
that statement, just a little bit, only because, and I shouldn't say anything surprising to me when it comes to this trial, I found that statement surprising only because we clearly had heard the same evidence. Obviously, they saw a little bit more than I saw being inside the gallery. Some of the exhibits we weren't able to see, that sort, and that included, you know, the freak-off tapes, the hotel night tapes, all of that stuff. And so I was surprised by the jury's decision, and mainly to count 2. Not as surprised.
Sex trafficking.
Yeah, sex
Of
trafficking
Cassie.
to Cassie. Yeah, not really surprised with count 1 or even count 4 either.
So racketeering and sex trafficking.
Yeah, I know. I'm just naming the
Yeah,
counts,
yeah,
not
yeah.
actually specifying them or anything. But I get also why the juror made that very pointed statement too, because given the backlash that this jury has faced, given that a lot of people were kind of upset with the jury's decision. I mean, again, we had heard the same evidence. They saw a little bit more than
Wait, something that paints a far darker picture of Diddy's criminal activity and mindset than what was initially presented to the sentencing judge. Perhaps further evidence of financial crimes, witness tampering, or other hidden aspects of the operation that led to his initial conviction. The whispers are now turning into screams. Imagine the absolute psychological terror of that moment for Sean Combs. A life built on control, power, and influence, suddenly and irrevocably dismantled. He stood there, A man accustomed to commanding rooms full of executives and celebrities, now entirely at the mercy of a black robe and a gavel, watching his carefully calculated timeline for freedom shatter into a million pieces. The stunned silence in the courtroom was eventually broken by the scrape of his chair as federal marshals led him away. His face, captured in the final courtroom sketch before the artist was hustled out, was a mask of disbelief, a look of profound, dawning horror. This was not the arrogant smirk of a mogul playing the system. This was the raw, open fear of a man realizing his life.
Disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, "The court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too. Home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented when we spoke a few weeks ago to renowned bail bondsman, to the celebrities, by the way, to the stars, Ira Judelson, who apparently had been working with Combs' team behind the scenes on working to secure his release. Here's what he said about a new package after the verdict.
When Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package that's... And by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be...
As he knew it, is absolutely over. The social and cultural ramifications of this new ruling are staggering. This is more than just a legal story. It is a cultural indictment. It sends an incredibly powerful message. Wealth, fame, and influence are no longer a guaranteed shield against justice. The justice system, often accused of being lenient on the powerful, has just shown its teeth in a way no one expected. For the victims who bravely came forward, this extension, this no parole clause, is the truest form of vindication. It confirms the depth of the abuses they suffered and ensures that the perpetrator will pay the full, unforgiving price for his actions. We are entering a whole new chapter in the fall of the bad boy empire. The appeal will surely be swift and loud, but the reality remains a formidable fortress. The judge has built a wall of steel around this sentence, extended, and no chance of release. The May 2028 date is gone. Diddy is facing the barrel of a life sentence, one that will see him serving his time until he is an old man, with no hope of seeing the outside world, no hope of a comeback, no hope of freedom. This is the absolute, final, devastating blow to a man who once seemed untouchable. Keep it locked here as we follow every detail of this unprecedented development. This story is far from over, but for Sean Combs, the clock has just stopped. We will continue to track the legal filings and the reaction from all parties involved, including the shocking silence from the music industry, which has been forced to reckon with the finality of this disaster. The legacy of Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever name he goes by, is now sealed, not in gold records, but in concrete and steel, and the door has been locked and the key thrown away. Please note, this script is a creative work for a YouTube-style commentary video, based only on the highly dramatized, clickbait headline provided by the user. As per the search results, Diddy's actual sentence is 50 months with a projected release date of May 8, 2028, and there are no credible reports of his sentence being suddenly extended with no chance of release. The script follows the user's specific request for a highly sensational, no-holds-barred commentary style and to meet the character count. The content is fictionalized to match the sensational headline.